The French and Indian War. In our last class, we talked a great deal about how the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War as it was known in Europe, was started. And we talked about how a young George Washington went from Virginia down here to go chit-chat with the French and tell them to get off English land, and then decided to basically start a war. The first fight that he had with them was here at Fort Duquesne, and then the second fight, battle that they had with them, was here at Fort Necessity. Okay, that triggers a war between the English and the French all over the world, but we're only going to talk about the part that happened here in North America. And here in North America, it was called the French and Indian War. Now, I'm not going to get into all the battles. As you can see, there was a lot of them. Actually, some of them right here, right near where we are, on Oswego, and up in Canada, and then right over at Fort Niagara, which some of you might have even gone and visited in time. So the war starts off. These are the area of the 13 British colonies, right? New France is all this French territory in here. This is all a big, huge chunk of land. Now, war goes on for quite some time. Not going to get into the details on that. If you want to, I can tell you some titles of some good books, but not right now. In the end, England wins. Yay, England. Okay? But as you can read right down here, this war, the French and Indian War, left England unbelievably poor. They won, so all of this territory became British territory, but they also were left unbelievably poor. And this is going to cause some problems between the British and the colonists down the road. Very, very important that you understand the French and Indian War, the British won, the colonists won. We were happy about that, but they had a big debt, big, huge bill at the end of the war that they had to pay. This map shows the changes in the geography. All right. Before, it was just this part of the North American continent that was the British colonies. Now all of this became British territory. So the British, in winning the French and Indian War, received an enormous amount of land and a huge amount of territory, which was very, very exciting to all of the colonists. Because if you were a colonist living in Salem, Massachusetts on a farm, or in Owego, New York here on a farm, you were starting to run out of room, right? You needed more land. And we talked about that in the class this morning for our warm-up. More land equals more money. And the more people you have here, the less land each person gets to have. So having all of this, look at all it's millions of acres of new territory. All those colonists were licking their chops, very excited that they were going to be able to get this new land. Okay, that was what the colonists were looking for. But again, England wins the war, but is left poor. There is going to be a problem here. Now, the part that's down here in red and yellow, you need to fill out on your note sheet. Okay, while I chat a little bit about it. Let me scroll down a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Make it a little bit bigger. Whoop, scroll down again. Whoop. There we go. All right. So when we say that England won the war but was left poor, this is what I'm talking about. Please write this down. That the English war debt, okay, the debt, the money that they owed people, that they borrowed money from during the war, to pay for the war, to pay for the soldiers, to pay for the guns, the ammunition, the boats, the wagons, the food, whatever, okay, came out to be £725 million sterling. Pounds sterling, you say? Yeah, remember, this is England. This is English money. Okay, that's what they paid in. Now, I went to a website and I put in 725 million pounds sterling in that year that this happened in 1763, and then I hit a button that said translate that to what it amounts to today. And this is the number down here, which you don't have to write, but I just wanted to say it so you got to get an idea of what we're talking about here. $139 trillion in today's money. All right, not hundreds, not thousands, not millions, not billions, but trillions. $139 trillion. That is an unbelievable amount of money. Okay, so when this is big. This is important. Somebody's got to pay this bill, and this is a big bill. This is huge. Okay, so the French and Indian War had some other results too. Now, not only did it leave England with a tremendous debt, 725 million pounds sterling, or over $100 trillion in today's money, the colonists that were left in the 13 colonies, 13 British colonies, still wanted British troops to stay here for protection. Remember that the French had been friendly with the Indians. It was the French and Indians versus the British. Well, the French are gone. This is all British territory, but the Indians are still there, and they are mad, very mad. So who's going to protect, people in Virginia and New York and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Georgia from all of these very upset Native American warriors who were really good at killing people? Okay, so the colonists wanted British soldiers to help protect them. Okay, which sounds great, no problem at all. 10,000 British soldiers. Okay, that's good. Well, who's going to pay the 225,000 pounds sterling that it costs to pay these troops, to feed the troops, to have the troops sleep in barracks and put shoes on their feet and hats on their heads and all the rest of that stuff? Okay, and just as another quick heads up, what does that mean today? In today's money, $26 billion every year for those 100 or those 10,000 British soldiers would have cost $26 billion. Okay, so that is a lot of money, and that's every year. That's not just you pay it and you go away. That's this year you pay it, and next year, and next year, and next year. Again, you're seeing how this is really racking up the money for England. This is really very, very expensive. Okay, now, I also, and I forgot to mention this in the last slide, you need to have written this down, the cost of the British soldiers. Make sure you have that written down, because this is important. And then the third thing that I need you to write down right here is also in red and highlighted in yellow. In England, only 25% of all Englishmen are eligible to vote. But in England, the taxes that you had to pay that were created by the English Parliament, they would have had to have voted for those representatives to say, yes, my people want to pay that tax, or no, my people don't want to pay that tax. Okay, so in England, taxpayers got a chance to be represented by the people that were making their taxes. Okay, that's going to be a big deal, even though it was only 25% of all Englishmen, because in the colonies and back in England, only rich white men were allowed to vote. All right, because of this big debt, and because of the fact that the colonists wanted British soldiers for protection, because it was going to cost so much money for this, the British Parliament, which is, the representatives of the British, white men, rich men in England, got together and they voted and they said, well, we got this big, huge bill for this war that was started by a colonist, George Washington, that basically helped the colonies. The French weren't attacking England, the French were attacking the colonies, and the colonists want all of these expensive British soldiers for protection. Well, tell you what, let's raise taxes on the colonies and they can pay for their own protection. Okay, so please make sure you've written this part down in the English-British view, that the English Parliament votes to raise taxes on the colonies to pay for their protection. And I just want you to kind of pay attention to the fact that, if you wanted a plumber to come to your house and fix your bathroom, you would pay them, right? You wouldn't expect your next door neighbor to pay for your fixed up bathroom, right? So that's what the British Parliament was saying. It's like, well, if the colonists want this service, then they should pay for it. And we'll raise taxes on them so that they will pay, for their own services. And that, I'm an American and all, but I could see the logic behind that. That makes sense. That's not a bad thing. Okay. Okay, now it's the American colonists' view. Now you have to remember, before we start writing anything here, American colonists were British citizens. They they enjoyed being in the British Empire. They sang "God Save the King" of England. That was their national anthem. These are British citizens. Okay, so please make sure that you remember that. Now, when England's Parliament voted to raise taxes on the colonists went ballistic. They were, hey, wait a minute. Parliament can't raise our taxes because there are no representatives in the British Parliament from the colonies. All of those British representatives, they represent the Englishmen back in England from York and Sussex and Suffolk and London and Duxbury and all the rest of those areas over in England. They don't represent us. There is no Virginia representative in the Parliament. There's no representative from Massachusetts or New York or Georgia or South or North Carolina. Wait a minute. We're not represented in Parliament, and they therefore can't make laws for us. They can't tax us because we're not represented. That is the right of every Englishman, that he only has to pay taxes if he is represented by the government, and he only has to follow the laws of that government if he is represented. Okay, we talked about that with the rights of Englishmen, and the Englishmen in the colonies said, wait a minute, we're not represented there, so you have no power over us. You can't tax us because we're not represented. This statement down here, when you're writing down no taxation without representation, this is the rallying cry of all of the American revolutionaries. This is when the American Revolution really starts. Okay, at the very end of the French and Indian War, when the British Parliament starts trying to get some money from the colonists, and the colonists turn around and say, you can't have our money, taxation, unless you let us speak in the government, representation. All right, so this is super important. These 1, 2, 3, 4 words, if you know this, you know the basic reason why there is an American Revolution. Okay, so please make sure that you know that. Super duper important. Okay, now your whole sheet should look like this now. Okay, you don't have to worry about the British territory being fixed on there. You can if you want, knock yourself out, but it doesn't have to. You definitely have to have all of this stuff here. Please make sure that you do have all that stuff and you understand what it means. Alphabet practice doesn't do you any good. Now, study this up, because there is a hint, 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 fairly good possibility, hint, 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 that you'll get a real quick quiz on this when you come to class to make sure that you did what I asked you to do, which was to listen to the movie, fill out the sheet, pay attention, okay, learn a little bit of stuff, okay? So make sure that you have this filled out, study it up, make sure you understand it. If you don't get something, I'll give you a couple of minutes in the beginning of class. I don't know, anybody got any questions? Raise your hand, okay? Because if you have a question about it, so does probably like 10 other people, and they don't have the guts to raise their hand. So be the bigger person, raise your hand, and then we can chat out and make sure that everybody knows everything. So when you take the quiz, everybody gets 100. All right? So good luck.